Good afternoon. Happy Friday, folks. This is the Week 11 AceMind Slate breakdown for NFL on DraftKings. Joined by my friend Jung here. How are you?
Doing pretty good. How are you? Did you write that song? It's pretty good.
Yeah, no, it's a catchy tune. I don't know where I've heard it before.
Yeah.
So Week 11, interesting slate.
We should before we start, we should figure out if we can get rights to the Doom soundtrack.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be pretty cheap, right?
Yeah. What is that? Rip and Tear? That song's a banger.
Yeah.
It's on the gym playlist.
Love that. So this week's slate's kind of an interesting one. There's some good spots here and bad spots here. A couple divisional matchups that, could go either way. Have a lot of history between the teams. I guess we'll just dive right into it. Starting with the Vikings at Tennessee. So, Vikings up until now, despite a few games, have looked really solid on defense. And I'm kind of expecting them to have a similar performance here as far as the spread and the total is concerned. Titans still trotting out their elite quarterback, obviously, Will Levis, who to date has significantly more turnovers than he has touchdowns. And the Titans aren't really scoring many points with him, especially after they lost D-Hop. Like 17 points a game average, I think, and now they're going against the Brian Flores defense that leagues the lead in blitz rate and in general has proven to be quite an issue for opposing quarterbacks.
Yeah, kind of not the most fun game we started out with here. Sam Darnold has kind of started his second half swoon that we've seen from him before in his career. I'm at least a little bit interested, starting on the Tennessee side. The only real player I'd be interested in here is Calvin Ridley, who's been really good the last few weeks. Minnesota defense has been really good, really good all year, but I feel like, if I remember correctly, they haven't been that great against wide receiver ones. And he could be productive against 70, pretty low ownership right now. There's at least something there for 6,200.
Yeah, and since Hopkins left, they've sort of relied on him really heavily. He's got a 40% target share and 80% of the team's air yard shares. So, obviously they're going to be playing from behind and throwing the ball a ton, and there really aren't any other options on the team besides Calvin Ridley. So even on a volume standpoint alone, I do like him. I'm not sure if I like him, as a one-off or part of the game environment. Like you said, the Vikings historically have kind of shown this strong start to the season and sort of taper off towards the middle and the end. But that being said, the ownership is really low here, and we have seen ceiling games from Sam Darnold and Justin Jefferson in the past, even on limited volume, because we know when the Vikings get up, they like to extend their drives and run the ball a lot. Sam Darnold hasn't thrown over 30 passes, and I think most of his games, only 2 or 3 games, has he thrown over 30. And Justin Jefferson has put up ceiling scores, but again, it's on limited target volume, no double-digit targets this season yet. A lot of his points are coming through efficiency alone, which certainly can happen against the Titans defense, but it's going to be a scenario where you need them to score some points quick and then hope you get there.
Yeah, I think this Titans team is a little not as bad, I think, as the box score results show. They lost 2 games early in the year because Will Levis just literally threw games away. I know the Lions put up 52 on them, but they also turned the ball over 4 times. I think Mason Rudolph gave up 2. I think they had a punt return for a touchdown, a long punt return to set them up at the 10, and then I believe a pick 6. So it's that's kind of misleading, I think. I'm not really interested in anyone from Minnesota here. It's kind of an ugly game.
Yeah, and I will give the Vikings some credit. I feel like I play a couple Sam Darnold stacks every week, and last week they obviously had a bit of turn the ball over issues against the Jacksonville defense, who I think have been sort of better than most people are thinking up until this point. They kind of show a lot of different schemes as far as man versus zone and their cover 2, cover 3 rates. Obviously, I think 3 turnovers for Darnold last week. 1 or 2 of them were at the goal line or in the end zone or in the red zone. So I do think that, this game would look differently as far as box score watchers would go if those balls were not turnovers. And I'm not apologizing for Sam Darnold or saying that he isn't making bad throws. But that being said, there were a lot of points left on the board last week.
Yep, I'm with you there.
It brings up a point about Hawkinson, low ownership. Yeah, so Hawkinson, since returning from IR, hasn't played like his full workload of snap rates. I think he's hovering like at less than 50% snap rate. That being said, like he's still a huge target for them in the end zone and in the red zone specifically. And I don't know if they're just limiting him, trying to keep him healthy in hopes for like a playoff run or what, but I think it's something to worth mentioning, and I think now the more that I think about it, if I'm playing like a Darnold stack, whether it's with Justin Jefferson or Hawkinson, I probably do want to put Ridley in there just because I don't think anybody from this game really returns a GPP viable score if it doesn't stay somewhat close. And for the Titans side, that's obviously coming through Ridley.
Yeah, I kind of wish that there was a tight end in his salary range, like a Evan Ingram or Taysom Hill, that was getting more ownership. That would make him more attractive to me as just like an easy pivot off. I don't really see that this week though. From tight end, it seems like ownership's going to be pretty spread out.
Not much to talk here about the Tennessee backfield. It's been a split between Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears, and even with the split, they're not that productive against a pretty dreary O-line. I think they combined for maybe 100 yards from scrimmage last week together. So now they're going up against the Vikings. I don't have much interest at all in the backfield here for Tennessee.
Yep, nothing for me.
Right on. Let's move along to one of the divisional matches we were talking about. Some storied history between these two teams. We have the Seahawks at the 49ers. In past matchups for these teams, it's been mostly trouncings by the 49ers. They've won 6 straight, the last 4 being 2-score wins or more. So probably going to see a similar game script here where Seattle's playing from behind and throwing a lot. I think the Seahawks are like first or second in the league in passer rate over expectation. Wouldn't be shocked at all to see Geno Smith drop back 30, 40 plus times. And they get DK Metcalf back, so a lot more firepower for this offense. So I kind of like this spot here.
Yeah, we saw these teams play 4 weeks ago when I was in Norway on a Thursday night game, and that was a super high scoring. Brock Purdy's numbers against if he played against the Seahawks every week, he'd have Tom Brady level stats.
Yeah.
He's been amazing against them so far in his career, including the playoff game a couple years ago in the wild card round. A good game to target. Typically, though, I mean, I would caution a little bit. We'll see where ownership is on this game. There's definitely chalk on McCaffrey, but historically, we see the second time these teams in division play, the games tend to be lower scoring. Not saying that, in this case, Seattle's defense the last few weeks have been pretty terrible. And they're still sky high in PROE. So this game could definitely still get there. And there's elite skill position players everywhere, especially with DK Metcalf back.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of players being back, CMC obviously returned last week. And we kind of predicted this. He just straight back into the role that he always had. We thought that they weren't going to bring him back if he wasn't fully healthy and ready to go. And we saw that. Played 90% of the snaps, saw a ton of opportunities on the ground and through the air. So I mean, I like him here. Obviously, the field does as well. But at 8,300, he still has one of the best roles in the league for sure, and his upside is tremendous.
Yeah, him and Saquon probably, and I guess Mixon now too.
I put maybe Kyron in there too, but
that's true. But they seem to be using Corum a little bit more. Anyway, McCaffrey. I mean, he looked just fine last week. Didn't really see any issues with his speed or anything. He had that one play where Purdy threw the ball over the top against the linebacker that McCaffrey just blew by him off the line of scrimmage. So, I mean, it just looks like a really good play. Just the ownership is really the only concern here.
Yeah, one thing I did kind of find interesting is that with CMC back, I thought obviously he's going to take, opportunities away from the team. I think that hurt Kittle the most. The thing I was surprised by is that Juwan Jennings has started to cement himself in this offense. I don't think he's, the third option anymore. He's more of a 2A, 2B situation going on there. So I was kind of hesitant to play him last week because I'm like, well, there's more players back. Historically, they don't really like to go to Juwan Jennings, but throughout I think 3 weeks now, maybe 4 weeks, he's shown to be pretty capable, pretty consistent targets. And obviously in the game environment here, he's going to be a good option.
Yeah, it's just really tough with this Niners offense because they have really. We saw Pearsall get his first touchdown last week, so now they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different skill position players that all have huge ceilings. And so just generally, I'd rather be looking like Juwan Jennings 18% owned or Ricky Pearsall, even he doesn't have quite the same role as Juwan Jennings. It doesn't get his target as often. Pretty clearly seems like targeting Jennings. You're getting Pearsall at 160 ownership, and we saw last week he has the upside he has the yards after catch upside to score long touchdowns. So I kind of like that as a pivot at almost the same price, especially in Purdy stacks where you're getting ownership on Purdy, like a Purdy, CMC, Pearsall. It's pretty attractive to me. And also, I'd say for Seattle, real quick, speaking of ownership, DK Metcalf. I mean, we don't know what condition he's in, obviously, but 3% ownership, and the Niners have really struggled with these big wide receivers. They've been better with Trevor's Ford, but over the last few seasons, Metcalf has had feels like a lot of success against the Niners. So I like that at super low ownership if I'm going to game stack.
Yeah, I like it too. I like game stacking both sides of this. Like, I'm not playing one or two offs from this game, I don't think, unless it's like a CMC predicting a blowout. Like, the one way I do think that this game sort of gets out of hand and gets run away with is that Geno Smith this season has not been very good under pressure. And even though the Niners aren't like a super heavy blitz team, they are really good at getting pressure on the quarterback. Just with, obviously their front three, front four are really good. So the way I do kind of see that playing out where this game doesn't shoot out is sort of where the 49ers defense takes over and gets pressure on Russ or on Geno. Imagine we still had Russ on the Seahawks.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, FK. No, thank you for that tip of the hat. I was actually in Bergen, Norway. It's it's on the coast, the western coast. Beautiful, beautiful city.
That's one where they have like the famous like football pitch.
No, they have like a kind of like a waterfront thing with all these buildings, like these tall buildings that are like kind of like row homes almost. But it's like a World Heritage thing. That's where we stayed. It was really nice. Anyway, yeah, I was in Norway. It was like 3 a.m. waking up for that Thursday night game. It was a good game though.
Yeah, low ownership too on Jackson Smith and Jigba. I know with DK back, that obviously puts kind of a wrench into things, but he looked really good against the Rams. So I wouldn't hate going back to him, especially if the Niners are trying to pay more attention to DK. I could see a scenario where, like you said, they struggle against him and they start putting one or two shadows on DK, and then that opens up some stuff for Jackson.
Yeah, this is a big slate, but there just isn't really that many games to me that I love targeting, or like even individual plays that I'm like all over. Kind of like last week, I felt like there was a lot more in the week before. I feel like there was a lot more like individual plays that are just priced out really well or looked really good. So I think this week kind of feels like to me, even for a bigger slate, one where a mega game stack could get there, where you have like a Purdy double stack plus JSN, like a 4 or 5 player stack from a game could be the one. And then obviously this seems like a great game to target for that.
Yeah, there's a few spots there. We'll touch on them, but this is certainly a game where like I don't mind getting a ton of exposure to this game and mixing and matching and hope I get the right pieces. Moving on. Well, this is a good segue because this is kind of a game I am interested in this week. This is the Browns at the New Orleans Saints. So obviously with the Browns starting Jameis Winston, their play rate has gone up. They're playing faster. They're throwing the ball a lot more, and the throws are obviously better quality than what Deshaun was giving them. We've seen Cedric Tillman sort of emerge as their primary target on there, and he's fairly cheap so far. And in general, this game's a pick 'em, pretty high total, dome environment. And while both of these teams do have like a strong run game and a preference to run the game, I think that, there's obviously scenarios here where they kind of abandon that and they're just going to be chucking the ball the whole game.
Yeah. I mean, Kamara at 31%, he's got a great role too. I don't want to downplay that, but we haven't really seen him get there, have we, the last couple of weeks? He should have scored a long touchdown last week, which would have been enough for him. But I mean, Tillman, like you said, he does look like a wide receiver one. I think he's shown that he has a talent for it. But I do kind of like Njoku as the obvious pivot off of that. There aren't any great tight end plays. That's why we see the ownership spread out, and same price as Tillman essentially. We've seen Jameis target Njoku a lot as well, so I don't mind that as a pivot in this spot. I mean, definitely seems like a game you can stack. It's just pretty gross once you get outside of Kamara and these same skill position players.
Yeah, and then there's also Judy there at the same, $100 more, but the same price point and a third of the ownership. And it's not like he isn't getting targets on the offense. The last 2 games, he's got, I think, 9 and 10 targets, or 10 and 9, one of the two the other way. But this is probably a game where I do expect them, if they don't have success on the ground with Chubb, which they could, I can totally see it. Like, since returning from his injury, hasn't had a huge snap rate, but he's been really efficient on his touches. And then now they're going against the Saints, who aren't, terrible against the run, but they are giving up a lot of yards before contact, and the Browns are sort of positioned in a good spot there. But like I said, I think the Browns are still trying to play a bit more aggressively. They're throwing the ball more and playing at a faster pace than they were before. So I don't mind stacking Jameis and eating the chalk with Tillman, but also getting different in the stack itself and the bringbacks.
And to your point, I mean, look at this is ETR, right? I think I haven't run our projections yet. I'll probably put them up later today or tonight or tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I mean, you can just see the differences. It's only a 0.9 difference in projection, and the standard deviations are the same. Like if you were to plot these out, these distributions for these receivers out, I mean, they'd be almost identical, except for Tillman probably has a slightly higher median as we're seeing. So there's not much of a difference between them, and you're getting Judy at 1/3 the ownership of Tillman. So that does seem like a pretty nice pivot, just from a pure projection standpoint.
Yeah, I think Chubb is absolutely MME viable. Like besides the red zone role, like obviously Njoku's got a huge red zone role, but if they're at the 1 or the 2 and it's first, second down, they're probably gonna be running the ball. Chubb's been really efficient with his touches. I don't have his yards before contact or yards after contact on hand, but he's been really efficient in the touches that they are giving him, and his touch rate has slowly ramped up over the weeks. So I think they are easing him back into a role, and then when that role is going to super expand, I'm not sure, but at $6,000 and really low ownership, could totally see that.
And New Orleans is 31st in the league in EPA per play against the run. The only team worse is Dallas. So yeah, absolutely, he can get. I mean, we've seen Chubb. We haven't seen the big game for him this year, and like who knows? His injury was so nasty last year. It could be one of those where it's like 2 years before we see Chubb look like Chubb again. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, he can be a smash this week.
Yeah, one thing to note on the Saints is like they're kind of middle of the league in DVOA against the pass, but they are allowing the most 20-yard and 40-yard passes, so they're really susceptible to the deep ball. Obviously, that bodes out well for the Jameis passing stacks and Cedric Tillman. But I think in general, like this game environment has a lot of opportunities to kind of blow up and be the game you need. So I love taking shots at stacks here. I prefer stacking the Brown side just because there's kind of clear one-offs you can bring back with him. And I think I have more trust in Jameis Winston getting the ball to his receivers and Derek Carr getting them to, obviously we saw MVS have a breakout game last week, and I think they're probably going to lean on him more as sort of like a downfield threat. But outside of him, there aren't really that many passing options for the Saints. And then obviously Kamara is soaking up a ton of the volume. So to me, it makes more sense to stack the Cleveland slide and then come back with Kamara or come back with MVS or maybe come back with Taysom if you're not playing Njoku in your tight end slot.
Mm-hmm. And Cleveland, by the way, is 3rd in PROE for the season, right behind Seattle. So that just shows, like, even when they've had Watson, who was the worst quarterback in the league by far, when he was playing, they still had a high PROE. So they're not afraid to throw the ball. Stefanski likes to throw the ball. So yeah, I like this game. I mean, everything you said makes perfect sense to me.
Yep. Other thing too is the Browns O-line is finally like actually healthy for the first time in the season too. So a bit of a bump there for pass protection, giving Jameis more time, and also a bit of a bump for Chubb as far as run blocking goes. In general, I think you should have a good amount in this game, stacks on both sides, whatever you want. Brings us to another fun matchup here. We've got Baltimore at Pittsburgh. We have seen the Baltimore offense just be absolutely dominant so far this season. They are leading the league in offensive DVOA, running and passing. The addition of Derrick Henry to their team has been, I think, absolutely pivotal in the success they've had this year. And against the Steelers, obviously their defense has been bolstered up. We kind of got like a strength on strength matchup here where the Pittsburgh defense has been really good at limiting red zone scoring for opposing teams, and in general are really good at limiting yards per drive. But on the other side, you've got the Baltimore Ravens, who have seen sort of like world beaters up until now. And obviously the weapons they have on offense are going to be a good match for this defense.
Yeah, Baltimore is just, their offense is blowing everybody away right now, especially with the pass. Their dropback EPA is 30% better than every other team. They're at 37% or 0.37 points per play, expected points per play when they drop back, and their success rate is like 4% higher than everybody else in the league. So they've just been extremely, dominant this year. There's no real other way to put it. And the Steelers defense has been good, but not like number one in the league good this year. So yeah, should be points here I would expect from both teams. We've seen with Russ, the Steelers have been able to get the ball to Pickens and some of those skill position players. So yeah, I'm expecting to see points here. Baltimore's defense has been one of the worst in the league so far this year. And Kyle Hamilton, is he out still? I think he is or maybe he's back. But anyway, without him, they're even worse.
No, Kyle Hamilton didn't practice. And then
Okay.
on the other side, we've got Dante Jackson and Highsmith out as well. So injuries
Yep.
on both sides of the defense here. Like you said,
Yeah.
with Russ under center, the Steelers have increased their scoring quite a bit, over 26 points in all of his 3 starts. That is on a low pass volume. However, Najee Harris didn't practice. I'm not sure if he's it looks like he probably will play this week, but in general, they've sort of run the ball and let their defense do the work and kind of play that slow game. But I think there'll be games scripted out of that here because a lot of their recent matchups have been matchups that they can dominate on both sides of the ball and just kind of pound the rock to a victory. And I don't think that's going to be a factor here. I think they're going to have to throw the ball a lot. And obviously, the connection between Pickens and Wilson has been incredible this year. So I like getting to both sides of this ball as well on a game stack.
You have any thoughts here on 0% owned Mike Williams on DraftKings? It's super cheap. He had no role last week until he caught the long. I'd forgotten he was on the Steelers until he caught that long touchdown last week. But I kind of wonder if, a 0.1% play, kind of like MVS for the Saints last week. I mean, Mike Williams, he's going to score if he gets there. It's going to be on long touchdown passes. So I kind of don't mind it as a punt and a way to play some of the chalkier plays on the slate.
Yeah, I would say that if the ownership on Calvin Austin gets steamed up, or if Calvin Austin wasn't 2% and he was more like 5, 8, 10%, I would totally like to pivot off to Mike Williams. But just recently, I think they did play Sunday night for the showdown. I played a ton of Calvin Austin and it obviously paid off. I think as far as a deep ball threat, he's cheaper than Mike Williams. On the Chargers, we saw Mike Williams be a contested catch monster, a down the field monster, all the above. I don't know how well he's meshed into the offense yet. Obviously, we saw a good play from him last week. I like both Calvin Austin and Mike Williams as deep ball threats, but in my stacks, it's obviously going to be Russell Wilson plus Pickens, and then I might rotate between Austin and Williams as the third guy in. I don't hate firing with either. Like, obviously, the Ravens defense is more of a pass funnel, strong against the run, and pretty vulnerable to wide receivers. Sets up well for, again, the rest stacks, but their DVOA against tight ends is, I think, 5th last in the league, and then wide receiver ones, I think, is dead last in the league. But, yeah, as far as, like, pass catchers go, for me, it's Pickens number 1 by far, and then take your pick between Freiermuth, Austin, and Mike Williams. Yeah,
Pickens looks like a great play on both sides, especially on FanDuel. He's a little cheaper over there still. So, yeah, I just really like he's a great receiver. I don't know what else to say. The only problem is sometimes he'll lose his mind on the field. Like last week, Russ threw that pick, and then he just started suplexing the cornerback or the safety. The corner was returning the interception. So he can lose his mind on the field, but he's pretty incredible athletes. And just looks like a great play here.
With Wilson under center, Pickens has a 16 average depth of target, 40% of the team's air yards, and a 25% target rate. So, I mean, clearly far and away the number 1 option.
Yeah, I agree with you, FK. The only real difference here is Russ is $2,000 cheaper, right? I mean, it opens up a lot for you, especially on the slate with no value.
Yeah, I still don't mind stacking Lamar because, like, on the slate, he's probably the only quarterback that has, like, the true separating ceiling, where, like, if Lamar doesn't hit a ceiling, then, like, pretty much all the other quarterbacks are in play. But if Lamar puts up, like, a 35 spot, like, you're going to have him in your lineups. And I like playing him with Zay Flowers and Bateman. One thing I did note about the Steelers is that they're limiting production to opposing wide receiver ones pretty well and allowing more of that volume to go to wide receiver twos, kind of doing the old Belichick, like we're taking away your best option and making you beat us elsewhere, which might not work for the Ravens because obviously they have Henry, Bateman, Andrews, and I think they get Likely back this week as well. So, like, tons of options outside of Zay Flowers, but something to note that, Rashad Bateman's way cheaper, coming in pretty low owned. And the Steelers are generally allowing more fantasy points to the secondary and tertiary options.
Yeah, I think you could also probably play Lamar naked here.
Yeah, sure. Kind of playing that.
Like, especially with Zay now, it's 6,900. Like, Lamar can get there, and Zay could have, the best scoring receiver could have like 5 catches for 80 yards or something. So I think, especially on FanDuel, I think you could definitely get away. You can get away with just playing Lamar and bringing back with a Steelers skill position player or something. Do something weird like that.
Yeah, like we mentioned before, this is another divisional matchup where could go either way, but Vegas seems to like this to be a high-scoring, close game, and I kind of agree with them. So I'm going to be playing it that way. And since there aren't a ton of other options as far as game stacks go or game environments that are going to lead to scoring, there's going to be a good amount of my rosters that are involving both Baltimore and Pittsburgh stacks.
Yep, and Likely is back, by the way.
Yeah, Likely is back. So,
yeah,
kind
he's
of
likely going to play.
Yeah, kind of a weird pricing spot between him and Andrews. We saw Andrews start to kind of reclaim his role and show that he isn't like a 40-year-old aging tight end in the league. But with Likely back, I'm not really sure how that affects either of them. It's going to be a bit of a tougher scenario unless they're running out a bunch of 12 personnel. Yeah.
Yeah, I think probably what I'll end up doing on the sim side is churning down. I usually do this with Lamar anyway, but I'll churn down some of the correlations a little bit, so I'm not forcing like double stacks and stuff with them. And then also on the results page, I'll probably be filtering out some Baltimore builds, like Baltimore 4 stacks or whatever, just because it's pretty hard for Baltimore, like too many Baltimore players to get there with the way that Lamar has to hit his ceiling, and same with Henry.
Yeah, when we run our sim, I think it'd probably be a good idea to go through and kind of show different ways to build. So that way, like if somebody asks, how do I do this or how do I do that in the sim or in the output, we can kind of point them to this video to show them different ways you can filter down your lineups, choose your quarterback pool, set exposures, do that whole thing. It takes us to the Jacksonville Jags at Detroit for, I believe, the highest spread of the week, -14. The Lions look great. I don't know what else to say. And the Jags do not. It's hard for me. There's a game, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? It was Detroit against, was it Houston
Tennessee?
or something? Tennessee, yeah, where like the spread was massive and nobody really wanted to play Detroit, obviously, because the spread was huge. The game wasn't expected to be competitive, and then still, there were GPP winning scores on the team.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. I think that was 2 or 3 weeks ago, and yeah, it was a huge spread. We talked about it on the show, and neither one of us wanted to play it just because of that spread. And remember, right, Calvin Ridley had like 100 yards receiving in the first quarter.
Yeah.
And then it was actually like Mason Rudolph was actually playing well, and it was somewhat competitive. And then the wheels fell off, and it was the special teams for Detroit and their defense's ability to create turnovers really completely turned that game. Not really turn it around, but made it easy for them to pull away. It was like 52-14 was the final. So yeah, I mean, I think you could play Lions defense here with Brian Thomas Jr. if you really wanted to. I mean, it's kind of hard to see that exact script recreate itself twice in the season, but I mean, we've seen this Lions team be able to put up points against anybody, and especially at home.
Yeah. And we have Trevor Lawrence not playing, Mac Jones starting. With Mac Jones, the Jags are worse than they were by far. With Trevor Lawrence, it's kind of hard to say. He's targeting a lot of short and intermediary stuff. Half of his passes are going to Evan Ingram or backs out of the backfield. And in general, like I think he's got like a 4 or 5 average depth of target. So if I'm going to like pass catchers or receiving options to bring back on my line stacks, I do think you can play Brian Thomas Jr. It's going to be a bit thinner just due to the pressure that the Lions generate on defense. But I don't hate Evan Ingram here at 5,200. He's going to be getting ownership, but his targets in the games that Mac Jones start are pretty high.
Yeah. The one nice thing about like the Tennessee Lions stack 3 weeks ago was that like literally the only player on Tennessee who was going to score points if they're going to score points was Ridley. And I guess you could argue because I guess you could argue Pollard in that game too. I think he might have been the only healthy running back for that game. But anyways, this Jacksonville team is a little more difficult because they do actually have decent skill position players. And like, I mean, Brian Thomas Jr., Evan Ingram, ETN, they all have ceilings, right? Even Gabe Davis has a ceiling that like it's a lot harder to find the right combination to play with a Lions stack or with like a Lions onslaught or whatever. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't really want to play Ingram at 11% ownership. If he's going to be the popular bring back, I'd rather just gamble on one of these receivers being the one.
Yeah, something to note too on the Lions you haven't mentioned yet, but they'll be playing without their tight end Sam Laporta. That brings a bit of value with somebody like Brock Wright, but historically the Lions have really only used him as a blocking tight end. I don't really foresee them, shoving him into like a huge pass catching role. They're probably just putting him in for pass protection. I do think that opens up a lot more opportunities for Jameson Williams, though.
Yeah, any of the underneath stuff that the tight ends would typically take would probably be taken by Amon Ross. So,
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I like I like both of those receivers. I mean, all these line skill position players, we've seen them all get there in the same week. So,
Yeah,
like this
Amon,
offense.
Amon Ra's kind of like Justin Jefferson, where he doesn't get many targets per game, but he's really efficient with his touches. Obviously, I think he scored a touchdown in like I don't even know how many weeks running now, but he scored a touchdown in a lot of games, and
I think it's 5 in a row now.
Yeah, like 5 or 6 in a row now. So I wouldn't expect, or I wouldn't be shocked if that continues. And also in the backfield, I like playing Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. I sort of lean towards David Montgomery. I sort of always do, because he's a cyclone and my biases and whatnot. But typically, like the way they use David Montgomery is like the early bruiser and sort of games where they have a clear and comfortable lead, and then Jahmyr Gibbs plays more of the third and fourth quarter and pass game, shorter drive scenarios.
Yeah. Amon Ra really needs like that. Even last week's game against the Texans, like the Texans were kicking too many field goals. And so like the Lions weren't really forced to like commit to the pass like they probably should have been. And Amon Ra really needs to get there on volume where he's like the elite PPR guy. So we just haven't seen the Lions be pushed like that this year. I don't remember anyway. So yeah, and this definitely doesn't seem like the game where that's going to happen.
No,
I think I prefer Montgomery today, Sunday, cheaper, a little less owned, and he pairs well with the Lions defense. You can kind of just set it and forget it. Like you don't have to worry about the rest of the skill position players if you play the script where Jacksonville doesn't score any points at all, and Montgomery, they just kind of run the ball with Montgomery a bunch. So I like that combination of players, and that way I don't have to think about the rest of this Lions offense or the Jacksonville skill position players.
Yeah, we may regret it, next week when we do our show, but it reminds me a lot of that, game 2 weeks ago where the spread's super high. I don't see a ton of like upside for like a full, Lions Jared Goff stack here. Love getting to the running backs and the defense, but outside of that, I don't think there's too many other spots where I think the upside is real for me to get a ton of ownership here on like a full Lions stack.
Yeah, agreed.
All righty, let's talk about the Rams at the Patriots. Mentioned earlier about the role that Kyren Williams has in this offense. One of the best roles in the league at the moment. He has an over 85% snap share, leads the league in red zone touches at 50 red zone touches, and has scored in every game this season besides one. So in a game here where they're favored and the team total is fairly healthy, it's hard to not like him. His rushing and his receiving role is really good.
Yep, looks good. 7,900. That's the Patriots have at least shown the ability with Drake May to score and force teams to kind of keep their offense, keep their team players on the field. You can't really say that as much for the beginning of the season. I really don't actually mind playing more into this game than like the 43.5 total would suggest. It doesn't sound like fun. The only real issue is like the Rams. Where there's going to be between 3 players who get all the production, and they're all expensive. So you can't like do like a full game stack or something. But I do kind of wonder if we can get some Drake May, maybe a Drake May stack or something in here. If we can make that work in a large field contest.
So the nice thing about Drake May is that his target tree was super condensed compared to Brissett. So like on top of him, the team is scoring, I think, a touchdown more on average with Drake May. And they're also throwing the ball like 10 to 15 times more per game with Drake May than they were with Brissett. The nice thing is that like his target tree is really condensed. It's Hunter Henry, Demario Douglas, and a bit of Ramondre Stevenson. But he loves targeting his tight ends. He loves targeting that slot position. We were talking earlier about Kayshon Boutte at 3,500. Does provide some salary relief if you want to stack the Rams side of it. And Kayshon Boutte does have over 40% of the team's air yards over the last 3 weeks. And it's not like it's on, one-off deep balls either. Like he's got, I think, 6-7 targets in those games. So it's not a super thin play. It's thin, but it's not like so thin that you're basically preying on him getting there with one target. He's going to get targets, and they are often downfield targets.
Yeah, and one thing I was mentioned this before, but one thing I'll say about him is he had a huge freshman year at LSU, if I remember right, like 2019. The year after Burrow and Jefferson and Chase all went pro. Or actually, it was the year after Burrow and Jefferson went pro, and then Chase sat out. And I think Boutte had a huge year that year, if I remember right. And then he kind of had like I remember what happened with him, but I remember he sat out a year or something. But anyway, he kind of fell off as a draft prospect, and he fell down into like he was drafted late was it by the Patriots? I think it was. Anyway, so he does have like pretty elite talent as like a 19-year-old, which is really encouraging for a draft prospect. And it's, I guess what I'm trying to get to here is he doesn't feel like as gross as like a value receiver play as like early in the year we were trying to jam in Yoshivas from Cincinnati,
Yeah.
who played like at Princeton and just was never really much of a draft prospect. At least Boutte here, like he looked like he was going to be the next great LSU wide receiver, right? He looked like he had the same level of talent as Jefferson and Chase and now Neighbors. So I really don't mind it, even as at this ownership on DraftKings. I really don't mind getting to him in my sim builds. I just have to be cognizant of who else is in that lineup with them.
Yeah, and obviously the game script sets up well for the Patriots here. The Rams have been kind of sneakily good against the run, and obviously like Ramondre Stevenson isn't like an absolute burner on the ground by any means. Has trouble holding on to the ball of all things. So I like that. I like the stacks there. I will say that like if I'm stacking either side of this game, I'm absolutely having bringbacks. Like I don't foresee a scenario where the Rams win by 18 or 20 points and none of the Patriots are viable as a bringback. I think that the ceiling outcomes in this game environment are going to come if the game stays close and both sides are scoring.
Yeah, and the Rams defense is 18th right now in EPA per play, so it's not like they're anything really to write home about. So like I don't want to overstate how good this Patriots offense is or anything, but I do think there's a chance here where I've been impressed so far with Drake May. I do think there's a chance here where they can put up some points here, and this can kind of turn into a little bit of a shootout. And the prices are so good on New England, especially that, if even like in a 24-21 type of Rams win or 28-24, that could easily be enough for these for a May stack to get there.
Yeah, and the nice thing, like you said, is that he's cheap, and the stacking options are cheap, so it leaves you a lot of room to pay up for the other side.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say before you move on is that he has running upside too. It's not like he's some stiff back there in the pocket. He's not Mac Jones. He can scramble, so he does have rushing upside here.
Yeah, even with the Rams defense not being great, the Patriots O-line is allowed, I think, the most pressures in the league. So he's going to need to run here if he wants any chance at winning the game.
Yeah.
Brings us to Falcons at the Broncos. Not a ton of interest for me here. The thing for this is the Falcons have been really reliant on their running game with Bijan Robinson. And then on the other side, you've got the Broncos defense, who has been really, really good this season at limiting both the run and the pass, and in general, just controlling the game on that side of the ball.
Yeah, Broncos defense has been pretty incredible this year. Even we saw last week, they really should have beat Kansas City. And Kansas City, even though we talk a lot about how Mahomes fell off, or he doesn't put up the same stats he did a couple years ago, they're still top 10 in EPA per play as an offense. So they're still a really good offense, and the Broncos defense, they really had a hard time against the Broncos defense. So I don't see. I'm not really in love with anybody on this Atlanta offense. We'll put it that way. Which, I mean, not really a bold take, but I do feel like this is a good spot for Denver.
Yeah, 6 in rushing DVOA, first in yards per play allowed, holding opponents to 18 points on average per game, which includes the Chiefs last week. Yeah, it's a hard matchup, right? Like, Atlanta's not a huge PROE team. They're not throwing the ball a lot. Kirk Cousins hasn't eclipsed 30 passing attempts in only a few games this season. They've been reliant on both Bijan Robinson down the field and then Tyler Algier and Bijan in the red zone. And I just don't see that being a case here where they're able to do that.
Do you have a take here on Denver backfield or the Denver offense in general? Atlanta's defense is like 20th, or is like not been very good this year, below average against both the run and the pass. So do you have an opinion on this Broncos offense?
Yeah, so last week, the rookie Audric Estime, whatever, took over the lead in carries, but he wasn't very efficient with them. Like, he only scored, I think, like 4 or 5 DraftKings points with a majority of the backfield carries. Obviously, that was against the Chiefs defense, who has been pretty good against the run so far this season, and the Falcons are not as good as that. I do kind of like the game script here for him, and maybe he shows a bit more flash with more opportunities. But outside of like him, I think really the only option you can go to is Cortland Sutton, who's obviously their number one target, 11, 10, 9 targets in the last 3 games, ranks 5th in air yards in the league. So I do like that spot for the Broncos. I don't know if I want to dedicate a ton of my rosters to a game environment that I'm not super stoked for.
Yeah, I hear you there.
Could be a scenario like with the Lions where I'm kind of cool running out like a 1-off or a 2-off and just throw the defense in there with him and say it's a low scoring game. And since the volume's so concentrated on the offense that, a player can still get there without the quarterback, they're still probably going to score 17 to 20 points.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll say about Asime, I'll have to read more about like what the Broncos coaching staff is saying this week about him. But he was a good running back in college. And I lost my train of thought that I was going to say.
Coach speak?
I forgot what I was going to say.
Sean Payton? I don't know.
On a week where there's no value, pretty much, right? We're going into Keishon Butte, who I just talked up, but still 22% owned value receiver because it's hard to find value this week. He is really cheap for a starting running back, right? And he may not be starting, but he's getting most of the workload anyway. So, I mean, there is upside here, in my opinion, for him at 4,500, especially on DraftKings and at no ownership. I don't mind him as a value option.
Yeah, and they've kind of relegated Javonte to the pass down work only. So, if it is a scenario where they're running the ball a lot and burning clock and, Sean Payton's playing Sean Payton football, then there's tons of opportunity for him. And like you said, value's thin this week. We got to maybe get a bit thinner at positions.
Yeah.
Moving on to Chiefs at the Bills. 46 total, tight spread. Both of these teams this season, we've seen some blow-up spots here from this matchup in the past. The problem is now that both of these teams are playing a bit different football. They're not as willing to keep their foot on the pedal if they're getting huge leads. They're playing smart football, managing the game in general. I think the league's doing this. We've seen the Chiefs be more willing to put up points, and their offense looks a lot better now that they're relying on Kareem Hunt, and DeAndre Hopkins is sort of like a foil to Travis Kelce, who's seen a lot more volume in the past few weeks as well. It does kind of seem that both of these offenses are trending upwards. Josh Allen is still without Keon Coleman, which is an issue, but stacking him is always hard because he spreads the ball out so much.
Yeah, both defenses are top 10 right now on EPA. And Buffalo had a lot of injuries at the start of year too, so like they're probably better than the numbers suggest. I mean, just like this is one of those where it's a great real life game and kind of a tough fantasy game for me. Prices are like, I mean, I guess Hopkins and Kelce aren't too bad at their prices, but like especially now Buffalo, Dalton Kincaid out.
Yep.
I mean, I guess there's value kind of on Dawson Knox, and Keon Coleman is out as well for Buffalo. Should mention that.
Yep.
So maybe there's going to be more condensed targets here for Shakir and Amari Cooper, but we just haven't really. This Buffalo team has just been hard to target in general for me this year. I'm not really sure how to attack this game.
Yeah, I think we could see more targets as well for James Cook out of the backfield with missing Coleman and Kincaid. FK says unstacked Allen, Kelce were all that stood out to him, but yeah, price ceiling here is tough. It's hard. Like obviously, like DeAndre Hopkins at 5,700 is nice. We've seen him mesh really well with the offense. Put up 2 touchdowns against the Bucs. That being said, like that volume, I don't think is going to be super sticky. It's kind of hard to tell where it's going to. I think Xavier Worthy's like I can't play anymore after what we've seen from him. It's just heartbreaking, to be honest. Kelce's volume is really good and really reliable, but at 6,300 at tight end and ownership, it's it might not be a spot you want to get to.
What about Xavier Worthy?
I can't play him. He doesn't know where he's at on the field. He doesn't know what team he's playing for. It's tough. Like you said, this is going to be a great real life game. I'm going to love watching it, but as far as DFS goes, it's really hard to pinpoint, what stacks you should play, how it's going to play out, and whether or not the points this team or these players put up are going to pay off relative to their salary.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say to play Xavier Worthy, but he does deserve criticism for the kind of some of the stuff that's happened. But I mean, Mahomes has missed him on like 4 wide open touchdowns this year, where like if he catches 2 of those, we're talking about what a great ceiling he has as no ownership. And it's just all we could talk about is just how many missed opportunities, and he's just an idiot and all that stuff. So, I mean, there's somebody with that kind of role always has upside, especially when Patrick Mahomes is their quarterback. It's just like, do you want to keep playing the Russian roulette game of trying to time the week that he finally catches 2 long touchdowns?
Right. Yeah. I mean, these teams are really efficient. as far as play goes. They do pass a lot, but there isn't a ton of play volume to begin with, and obviously both defenses are good. Red zones are good. It's going to be a game of like quarterback efficiency, and for GPPs, it's not really environment you want to target. You want tons of passes, tons of explosions on both sides.
Yeah.
Moves us to Colts at the Jets for an absolute barn burner. We get quarterback one, Anthony Richardson, back playing the Jets, who since Saleh left haven't been great on defense. I don't know. Are people going to play this game? Are people really going to play this game at all?
Well, here's the thing, right? If they aren't, I will. Because the thing is the Jets are kind of like trying to think a good comparison for them. They're kind of like I don't know, because the thing is where all the production is going to go, right? It's going to go between three different players: Breece Hall, Devontae Adams, and Garrett Wilson. And that was the whole theory last week for why Rodgers' stats look good. It's because like the volume is going to be so condensed on those three players that if the offense scores, one of those three is going to end up in a winning GPP lineup. And I feel that way the same way about them this week. Like, yeah, like it's not fun to play the Jets. Like the Jets have kind of just been a joke so far this year. Like how disappointing. But I mean, you can't argue the upside for all three of those players isn't as good as anybody else in the slate. So if nobody else is going to play them, then I will. And I see like Breece Hall's getting ownership. But like Devontae and Garrett Wilson, like last week you saw them like at 20% or like way higher in terms of ownership. I'm at least interested here. And Rodgers is a cheap player to start a stack with. So I don't know. I mean, I could talk myself into it.
Yeah, I could see it too. And as tough as I like to be on Anthony Richardson, he has shown a really good connection with Alec Pierce when he does play. Leads the team in receiving yards when he starts and ADOT. So I like that. Another thing about ADOT too is since Devontae Adams has joined the Jets, Garrett Wilson has become more of a downfield threat. He has 43% of the team's air yard shares and an average at the target of 12 yards. So, there are scenarios here where I could see scoring on the Jet side, obviously. And then Jonathan Taylor has been, I think, honestly, fairly good since he came back. And I think they might rely on him more here. Colts O-line ranks pretty well and yards before contact. And Jonathan Taylor's role is really, really good as well. He's got 87% opportunity share, third in snap rate. Looks pretty good. I don't hate him at his price and ownership, but I definitely I like him as part of the game environment stack.
Yeah, agreed there. I mean, man, I'm really gonna play Anthony Richardson this week, aren't I?
No, don't play
Just looking at this ownership. I mean, he has the rushing upside, and the thing about him is he's gonna be taking the high value deep throws, right? And if you need to connect on a couple of them, but if you do, he ends up with 30 fantasy points because of his rushing upside. And I know this Jets defense is good. They have Sauce Gardner or whatever. Actually, they haven't been that great, but they still have like the big name corner. But yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to get away from this game just looking at these prices and ownership, as gross as that sounds.
Yeah, the Colts do get Pittman back. I don't really know how to feel about him. I'd like him more if Flacco was under center. Like you said with A-Rich, he does like throwing that deep ball, and he's connected with Alec Pierce quite a bit downfield. I do think it gives the offense more options, but I'm not quite sure how he's going to shake out as far as the Sims go.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all dependent, kind of, on what I get in the final output. I was expecting like some of my tweaks and stuff. I'll end up with definitely a lot more of this game than the field's going to have.
For sure.
Which doesn't sound great, Saying it out loud is a lot worse.
You've talked me into it. Fine, I'll play some of this game stack.
Yeah.
Moves us to the Raiders traveling to Miami to play. I do like this spot. So does the field. Obviously, we've seen so this game environment sets up well for a couple reasons. One, obviously, the Dolphins are a lot better with Tua under center. And then two, like on the Raiders side of the ball, are they good? No, but they are so condensed in their offense between Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers that it still makes them viable plays as bringbacks, even if the team doesn't score a ton, just on volume alone.
Yep. Man, that Dolphins-Rams game was so infuriating. Unbelievable. That might be the best case ever for why showdown scoring needs to change, is how can a team win by 8 and end up with, like, I think it ended up being like a 5-1 stack for the Rams that won, or on FanDuel it was like a 4-1 stack that won. Like that's just unbelievable.
Yeah, no touchdowns, and it's showdown is such a bear. I hate it. But I mean, there is something to be said too. Like obviously, Dolphins coming off of that showdown game, cross country, right? They played in Los Angeles, and the Raiders are coming off a bye. You know, they're well rested. Gardner Minshew isn't great, and the offense isn't great in general. The defense is even worse, but they are rested. And I do think that there's enough of competitive, spirit left in the team that it could make the game interesting.
Yeah. I mean, if there's one thing that Antonio Pierce was hired for, it was that, like, right? I mean, last year they all rallied to save his job. I mean, they might end up doing the same thing here this year. So, yeah. Jacoby Myers, like, yeah, again, volume's condensed on him. 22% is if that trends up a little bit more, that's definitely one where there's so many receivers in the NFL, like so many good receivers in the NFL now. I feel like we'll be able to find somebody in that price range with similar upside. The thing about Jacoby Myers is like he's going to be getting there through PPR stuff, right? And so especially like if he's chalky on FanDuel, that's one that feels easy to get away from. But like Browers at 12% looks fine to me. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess Waddle and Hill at low ownership are interesting. Again, Hill can break any game open, so I don't know.
Yeah,
this is like a good game where I'll just be mixing in players with the Sims or with the tools we got, and whatever I get is what I get.
Yeah, as far as the ownership goes, I agree with you. It's a tough pill to swallow. I think the way I'll tackle it is by not playing these players unless it's as part of a Miami stack or a game stack environment. Because if you look at the ownership, right, 22% of people are playing Jacoby Myers. Gardner Minshew is 0.8% owned. So that's telling you like a vast majority of this ownership is coming from one-offs or last man in or optimizers jamming him in. So a way you can play him that the field isn't is just by playing that as part of the game stack.
Yep.
Some other things to note about this game. What I got here. Yeah, not much. Raiders defense is struggling, allowing 31 points per game on average. And 4 of their opponents have set season high scores against them. So I like this.
Jonnu is a value tight end, even with a little bit of ownership. It looks interesting. The Dolphins have made it a point to get him involved after the bye. So that's at least interesting as a value tight end.
Yeah, I played him on the showdown where he fell, at the half-yard line or whatever and didn't get in. So I'm a Jonnu Smith truther for sure, but man, that was frustrating. Yep. Yeah, Dolphins look good here against a bad defense. Obviously, they're doing better with 2 under center. Tyreek's still doing with that wrist injury apparently from the very beginning of the season, but at 5% ownership, his ceiling is still there for sure. I don't mind getting to him at all.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if Dolphins, but this is a chalk defense here. I kind of wonder if like in a super small field thing, like if you're playing the Thunderdome or something, if you could do Dolphins defense and Myers in a lineup just to be super unique. You're playing into both chalk, but like that combination is probably going to be very low owned, and Myers can get there without touchdowns on DraftKings. But that's pretty thin play for sure.
Should I do it? Should I throw in the 4-4-4-4?
Do it. Yeah, why not? We need to get that in case people are checking the leaderboards. We need that skull in there.
Yeah, exactly. Brings us to yet another just a week for divisional matchups here. We got the Packers at the Bears. The home road splits seem to be pretty real for the Bears. They didn't look great last week, obviously. Packers are coming off a bye. Yeah, Shane Waldron gone. New OC Thomas Brown promoted. So I forget what team he played for, or what team he coached for before, but maybe there's something there. Maybe they try to unlock Caleb Williams, but I don't know, how do you unlock Caleb Williams? It's a weird offense between him and his pass catchers.
Yeah, and Packers defense has actually been pretty solid so far this year. I'll have to read a little more about what the Bears are going to change, how they're going to change their game plan now without Waldron. Because we did see the 2 weeks where Caleb Williams went off. We've seen the upside from this offense, but yeah, it's been painful. It's been painful to watch.
Yeah, I do think the Bears are probably going to try to target a lot of short and intermediate stuff just to get Caleb going, high percentage throws, so that opens up a bit of stuff to DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, maybe some Keenan Allen stuff in the flat. So,
other thing worth mentioning is last week against the Patriots, there was a ton of wind, and I don't know if it's going to happen again this week. But that was part of the reason why it was really hard. So let's see. Let me find it. 13-mile-an-hour gusts, so not too bad. Last week, I think it was way worse than that against the Patriots. So that played into the ineptitude by the Bears a little bit. I mean, it's still inexcusable that they scored 3 points against the Patriots.
This game kind of scares me. I could see a scenario here where like Matt LaFleur just sort of plays Josh Jacobs. He hasn't had a ton of like opportunities, and obviously his touchdown regression is pretty bad. But the Packers O-line ranks pretty well in yards before contact, and the Bears are pretty bad on the opposite side of that. So I do kind of like Josh Jacobs here and as like a somewhat of a play, but I don't really love this game as far as like the game environment goes. And in general, it's hard to find stuff I like here. Maybe Cole Kmet at tight end, with a new OC could get there. He's relatively cheap and not going to be owned at all. So,
to be clear, I'm not advocating playing a lot from this game. There could be a little more upside here than the 40 total would suggest, but I mean, there's way better spots obviously this week.
Yeah, and if Jordan Love gets there, who gets there with him? It's one of those scenarios, like Reed and Dobbs are the obvious ones, but it's hard to pinpoint.
Yep.
You want to flip the FanDuel and talk about the Sunday night hammer for the main slate there?
Yeah. Bengals at Chargers after the Jamar Chase absolute nuclear explosion. The Trinity test from Jamar Chase last week.
I'll load projections in here so we can look at them. But yeah, it was a 50 spot, 45 spot for him.
Yeah, I was watching that Thursday night game with those goggles and then with the cream they put on their face, just like they got that who is that Edward Teller or whatever in Oppenheimer. Yeah, I was like sitting there watching that. That was
the crazy. Welding goggles on.
Yeah, just like ooh, because we've been talking about Jamar Chase for every week. I feel like every show we've done, we talked about
your favorite stack is always Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase.
Yeah, and of course the super nuclear spot was the Thursday night Island game, but.
So,
the obvious thing to talk about here is the Chase Brown chalk.
Yeah, and I don't hate it. Obviously, the Chargers' run defense is really good, and they've been pretty good as a defensive unit on the whole this season. But that being said, Chase Brown has emerged as the lead back and also gets a ton of pass down work and a lot of receptions. So maybe as like the late night hammer on FanDuel. I haven't built for FanDuel yet, so I'm not sure how value shakes out or what the running back pool looks like. But I don't hate it.
Yeah, it seems fine. I mean, 40% ownership is pretty rough against the Chargers defense. We've seen how good the Chargers defense has been so far this year.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the other kind of chalky players at that price are Ramondre Stevenson and Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb, obviously, there's injury question marks, and Ramondre, they've liked to use JaMychal Hasty, so he has the upside, but it's feels pretty thin.
Yeah, 15 targets for Brown throughout the past 2 weeks. So he obviously has that usage there, and they're probably going to need it against the Chargers. Chargers backfield has been tricky. Obviously, it was J.K. Dobbins, but Gus Edwards back kind of throws a wrench in that. They both had a goal line carry last week, so not much to love there. I think Ladd McConkey, obviously people are stoked on him, and I am too as a Chargers fan, but his target share is good. I do like Quentin Johnson. I played him last week too at low ownership, and he hit. Kind of like getting back to him again. He has that,
especially as the McConkey chalk pivot.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I played him last week, and his red zone role is good. He's a big target, and his downfield stuff's really good as well. Disley is, people were playing Disley last week too on the Chargers. I do kind of get it. He does have a good target share, but the Chargers aren't a team that's just like throwing the ball a ton, and when they are, it's not a huge tight end volume team.
Yeah, I will point out Dobbins at 12% ownership versus Chase Brown at 37% ownership and Dobbins is like $400 more. That seems like an obvious pivot from the same game. Dobbins has just as good a role as Chase Brown.
We typically like to target, home favorite running backs.
Yep.
Not much of a favorite, but you get the point. Let's go ahead and kick off this sim here. I'm running the slant, 19,000 entries. We'll get that going. Looks like I got a standard deviation bug. So if you see this error, sort by standard deviation and make sure you don't have any negatives. Boom. Bug fixing on the fly. Helping folks out. So while we run that, let's go through position by position. We'll do our favorite picks under 10. Starting at quarterback. Let me sort by ownership. Who do you like in at quarterback this week?
Man, let's go. I'm really between 3, and the 3 right there in the middle. And they're all pretty gross. Richardson, Drake May, and Aaron Rodgers. Let's go with Anthony Richardson for the week.
Okay, cool. I want to say Lamar, but the price and stacking options are hard to get to. And if he doesn't have, like I said, like a huge nuclear performance, then there's so many other cheap options that are going to get there on value alone. So while I do want to play some Lamar Jackson, and I will have some probably above 3%, I don't think he's going to be my pick this week. I'm going to go with Russell Wilson at 4%. Good stacking options. Game script sets up well for him. Ravens pass funnel sets up well for him as well. So I like that.
Yep.
At running back, we've got chalk between Kamara, McCaffrey, and Achane. Then it drops off a bit. Scroll down a bit. Who are you seeing as a low-owned running back play that you're liking?
Monty is just over the 10% hurdle. Let's go James Cook here without Dalton Kincaid. I know it's a tough run defense matchup, but we've seen Cook have involvement in the past game. I mean, you're getting him we've seen him have the 2 or 3 touchdown running games, so I don't mind that at all.
Yeah, I do expect him to get a bit more pass work as well with those other options out. I'm going to go to Nick Chubb here against the Saints. So we see obvious chalk on Cedric Tillman, and on the pass game as a whole, people are sort of leaning towards the pass game there in the Browns, which I like too. I will be playing Browns pass stacks, but at 6%, we haven't seen it out of Nick Chubb this season, but not too long ago, people were saying he's the best running back in the league. Great fantasy performance, and he looks really good running behind the Browns line. So I like him in a game that has a lot of scoring potential, pick 'em spread, dome environment. There's some upside there at 6%. Tight end, we have Hunter Henry at the highest own, followed by Travis Kelce and Davis Allen. Surprisingly, I won't be playing that, but hats off to those that are.
Yeah, I mean 2,500, hard to argue with, even though it's pretty terrible.
Yeah, I get that there's no value on the slate, but man, I don't think I'm finding it there.
Yeah, I'll go with David Njoku here. Just the same reasoning as you just had. Leverage off Tillman. Looks like this is a game that could have some scoring, so I'll go with Njoku. He obviously has the elite outside for a tight end.
Nice, yeah. Under 10 here, man, it's hard because tight end's kind of always hard because there's always those really good plays up in the just above 10 like Bowers and Smith that you want to play. I have a ton of them, but
I'd say Kittle, but he has a hamstring, so
yep. Kittle's hard for me to come back with. He saw a drop in targets last week. It could be a 1 week thing, 1 week sample, obviously, but I do have worries there with CMC back.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go with. Man, not a lot of good options down here, I'll be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I'll throw in the Taysom Hill shout, just because I know Kamara's coming in with a lot of ownership, and obviously there's the vulture role with Taysom Hill. Again, the same environment we were talking about, a lot of points to be scored, and at 7%, all you need to do, he's 4,500, kind of middle of the pack. If he runs one in, gets a few rushing yards, maybe a trick play passing touchdown, who knows, but there's always upside there with Taysom Hill. Wide receiver, looks like we have ownership condensing at the top with Jacoby Myers and Butte, Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman. So a lot of value plays. Well, not value plays, but guys who are maybe underpriced relative to the role we see bubbling up to the top, which I get. It's fine. No worries there. But starting with Garrett Wilson is where we eclipse the 10% mark.
Yeah, I'm really annoyed that Debo just barely misses that because he would have been I kind of like him a lot this week. But I'll go just under the 10%, and I'll say Devontae Adams after the absolute unbelievably bad performance he put up last week. I feel like this might be a good spot for him to bounce back a little bit. This Jets offense as a whole, I don't know. I mean, unless they're completely giving up on the season, which is entirely possible,
they've already fired one coach. I don't think they'll fire another one, so they're kind of stuck with what they got.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder if we might see a bounce back here from the Jets.
All right, next, come on. I'm going to go ahead and pick the obvious partner for my quarterback pick, Russell Wilson, and that is going to be George Pickens. Won't read off his metrics again, but his target share, his yards per route run, everything is elite going against the Ravens pass funnel defense. For Russ, who's led the Pittsburgh team to more scoring, more dropbacks and passes recently, and at 7.5%, I think that's a good spot.
Yep.
We'll take a look at defenses here to see the lay of the land. Titans, Dolphins, and Jets all coming in as chalk. Titans, obviously, just for salary relief. And Sam Darnold did throw 3 picks last week, but I do think that the Jags defensive unit is a bit tougher than the Titans here. You have any good home teams here coming in a bit lower owned? I mean, the Vikings at 3,700. Not a home team, but the Vikings unit's pretty good, and Mason Rudolph. No, they're not rolling out Mason Rudolph, are they?
Yeah, I would say Denver, number 1 in pass rush win rate. Looks really good as a defense to me. I know Atlanta scored points this year. They've been good offense all around. Cousins looks healthier, but he is still coming off of a torn Achilles. Like, his mobility isn't completely there, So if Denver's able to get pressure here, they could get sacks and could get turnovers. And also just shout out the Lions too at 3% ownership. We saw them at 3% ownership 2 weeks ago against a team with a backup quarterback, and they got there. Even to give them 14 points, they still had like 2 defensive touchdowns or whatever. So yeah, I like both those teams. The good defenses, low ownership, and both are kind of not that expensive.
Yeah, right there with you. Let's pop on over to our sim here. So if you've never ran a sim or seen this before, this is the results page you see after you run a sim. You can choose, the number of lineups you're playing. So if you're only playing a 3-entry max, you can filter down to 3, or 20 max, 150, whatever you want to do. I'll leave it at 20 just because it's what you can see on screen pretty easily, and I don't want to scroll a whole lot.
I think I'm just going to play that lineup number 4. I think I just locked that in right now.
Oh, man, Gibbs, McCaffrey, Myers, Adams, and Devo. Woo!
Yeah.
That's a good one.
That looks like a lineup I will have some combination. Although I'm playing on FanDuel, but I'll have a lineup that looks similar to that, I bet.
Yeah. And then so we have the min uniques drop down here as well. At 1, that just means that there's one player different between each lineup. And obviously, as you bump it up, if you bump it all the way to 5, for example, that means between each lineup, there will be a minimum of 5 different players. Pretty self-explanatory. It's a way for you to spread out ownership in your lineups and diversify if that's something you want to do. Over on the right, we have player exposures. This is a way you can globally limit exposure. So, for example, let's say we weren't very high on Russell Wilson and we didn't want to play 65% of them. We could limit him down to 25%. So I just type 25 in the max exposure box, and then I hit apply exposures. And what that's going to do is limit Russell Wilson to just 25% of the lineups and allow more quarterbacks to come in. Go ahead and reset that. Another way you can limit your quarterback pool is through the position filter here. So if you know what quarterbacks you want to play throughout the week, you can unselect them all and say, I want to play Tua, Russ, Josh Allen, maybe some Geno, Brock Purdy, so on and so forth. We'll throw Rodgers in there for you. Then you hit apply. And what that's going to do is make sure that only those players are showing up in your quarterback pool. And obviously that works the same for all the other columns, for running back, wide receiver, tight end, whole 9 there. And as you scroll over, we'll kind of show you here. So this lineup score here, this is actually determined by your lineup scoring weights. So what it does is each lineup after the Sims run will have a value for their ROI, their projection, their ownership, so on and so forth. And what this lineup scoring weight will do is combine those all into one value that we then sort by. So as you can see, they'll sort by descending default. And obviously, the higher the lineup score, the better it ranks out in your sim. And there's other columns in here for ROI, standard deviation in the ROI. You can see, obviously, we ran 5 fields here. You can see how many fields the lineup was kept through. And obviously, the more fields the lineup is kept through, that means it's a bit more resilient to changes in the field. So you can see how many contest generations it ran through and then how many fields it was kept through. Are there any other columns you kind of want to talk about here? I guess stat columns.
Yeah, those two, yeah.
So here, for example, like we were talking about earlier, Let's go ahead and just lock in, because we were talking about Baltimore, right? Let's go ahead and lock in Lamar Jackson here at quarterback, and we can talk a bit more about primary stacks here. So we scroll over and we can see that we have a lot of Baltimore 3 and Baltimore 2 stacks. Like Blaine was saying earlier, what you can do is limit, so we can see we have Baltimore 4 and 5 stacks in the sim. They're not showing up in our top lineups here, thankfully, because they don't rank out that well. It's hard for all of them to get there. But if you were getting lineups or stack combinations that don't really make a lot of sense, like a Baltimore 4 and 5, you can untick those and they won't come back. Or likewise, here with Atlanta, you'd probably never want to play a naked Kirk Cousins lineup, so you could untick Atlanta 1.
Yep. And let's say you wanted to limit your game stacks, like you don't want too much. You don't want to have too much on one game. You could also modify. I'm forgetting who Baltimore is playing now. I'm like we'll be blanking on it, but you could modify the secondary
Pittsburgh,
stacks. Yeah. So like you could say no Pittsburgh 2, 3, or 4, and that way you're only ever bringing back one Pittsburgh player with Lamar.
Yeah, so we can see secondary stack here. Like, say you did want to game stack this environment, like obviously your secondary stack, you're probably going to want a Pittsburgh 1, 2, or 3. So we could filter down to that and then see what it gives us here. So obviously now if we go over and look, we've got our primary stacks are all Baltimore's, then our secondary stacks are all Pittsburgh here. And that tells you that all of these lineups here are a game stack environment of the Baltimore-Pittsburgh game. You can see there's a lot of they're getting through a lot of the stacks here through the running back. That might not be what you want. So what you could do, same thing we did before. We'll limit Najee Harris down to 25%. We'll limit Jaylen Warren down to maybe 10%. And what that's going to do is give us more options here towards the bottom. Here we got a Calvin Austin, deep threat, George Pickens, and Calvin Austin, and George Pickens, Mike Williams. So those are options we highlighted earlier too.
Yep, and it's worth noting there's only 10, like with all these filters we put on, there's only 10 lineups that exist in our pool. And also, if you scroll to the right and look at the ROIs, I bet some of these ROIs are pretty bad.
Yep.
So that's just because like what we're doing is we're searching our entire lineup pool that we generated for you to find lineups that fit into your filters. But when you keep filtering like that, you might end up with like lineups that just don't sim well. So it's worth at least paying attention to that.
Yep. And another way you can do that too, without filtering your secondary stacks or runbacks. So I just reset the secondary stacks to allow all of them. What you can do is, for example, like say you for sure want George Pickens in your run back, you can come over here and lock him. And what that does is it sets a minimum exposure of 100. And that would mean that every lineup that comes back is going to have George Pickens in it. Or likewise, if I undo that one, if I go to George Pickens and undo his min exposure, I can search, like, let's say I wanted Calvin Austin in all of these. Right now he's only 5%. Again, I could lock him, and that will bring him back in all of these lineups. And you can see that not all of them are Pittsburgh secondary stacks, and that's just the way it sort of shakes out. If all the teams have one player, it's going to just pick one of the teams as a secondary stack, since no team is more than one. But there are options out there, obviously, with Calvin Austin that aren't distinctly a Pittsburgh secondary stack. So, yeah, I mean, that's a good way to build out stuff. What I typically do is if I'm building a 3-entry max, I'll do it the same way where, like, for example, I know I want to play an Aaron Rodgers as one of my 3-entry max teams. I'll filter down to Aaron Rodgers lineups. I'll say I definitely want to play him with Devontae Adams. I'll lock him. And I'll say I also want to play him with Garrett Wilson, lock him. And then as far as the other team goes, you could say you could lock them or not or do whatever you want. But this is sort of the way I'll build out my 3 max is I'll filter down to the stack I want and then go through and look at the lineups and see which ones I like the most.
Mm-hmm.
Any other nuances we should sort of talk about here? I guess so let's say you did want to play these 20 lineups into 20 max, for example. What you would do is hit export these 20 entries, and that'll pull up a CSV file. You can't see it because I'm not sharing that screen. What you would do is you would take that CSV file, copy those lineups, and paste them into your DraftKings upload. And then you download that file and re-upload it back to DraftKings. Yeah.
And another thing you can do is let's say that you're actually playing 150 in this contest and you're kind of getting 20 lineups at a time of each quarterback that you want. It's not like, I don't know if I'd really recommend that, but you could do it that way. Then what you could do is you could combine all those export files into one file, and then you could re-upload them into a sim as like, these are the lineups I want to play. And then you can get an idea of like, what's your expected ROI for all those lineups.
Yep. So if you were playing a 150 set, this is how our exposures would shake out. At quarterback, we would have 37% Russ, 17 Jameis, 12 May, 7 Lamar, Geno, Tua, Rodgers, so on and so forth. So, and again, like you said, or like we said, you can change all these. You can tweak them around. Maybe you want less Russ, maybe 20% Russ, and you want a bit more Rodgers, maybe 15% Rodgers. You would type in your numbers, hit apply, and then the lineup builder would come back and give you those exposures. Running back shaking out to be a lot of CMC, Kamara. We got Gibbs, Harris, Monty, Achane, Breece Hall. Tight end we're looking at.
Worth pointing out, I think. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, we could bump him if we wanted to, for sure. Tight end shaking out to be Hunter Henry, Davis Allen. Like Davis Allen is a guy, for example, I would probably trash can. I think there's just so many better options on the slate for value and the tight end that I'm not wasting a roster slot on him. So that would put us with Hunter Henry, Dawson Knox, AJ Barner, I believe, is starting for the Seahawks. So value there in a game that should be scoring points. I don't hate it. Jonnu, Conklin, Taysom, Njoku. Powers at 7% is kind of interesting to me.
Yep.
Wide receiver, we're looking at Myers, Chalk, Butte, Elijah Moore, Pickens, Puka, Devontae Adams, Calvin Austin. And at defense, Titans, Chalk is popping up just due to their salary. I'd probably want to limit that a bit. I'm not putting my finger on the scale too much for DSTs, but 32% of a DST that isn't going to score a lot of points is probably not something I want to get to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the whole kit and caboodle.
That's it. We did it.
Yeah. So if you're new here, be sure to head over to AceMind.io. We are still running promo code TIPOFF. That was for the NBA, but you can still use it for other sports as well. Go ahead and give us a try. That promo code, I believe, gets you 20% off your first month. 25 maybe?
I think it's
Not
25.
Sure. 25. 25% off an already competitive price for Sims. We load our projections in. Jung does the projections. It's a great package, great value, and our users do have a lot of success with them. So any other parting words for the fine folks here?
I'm expecting late swap to be live this week. I'm finishing up some final stuff with the output. It's been a real pain, but I think I have it and it's DraftKings only. Similar process to NBA. You just have to download your contest file and your entries file, and then we do all the work for you. All the late swapping. You'll get 5 different. You can choose how many different swaps you want to try, and then we report back. Here's your best swap.
All righty. Good luck in week 11, guys. I'll be in Discord up until lock. Got a pretty uneventful weekend ahead, so I'll be building lineups with you guys and hope to see you up top.
All right, see y'all.